Hello and welcome to another video review, and today we're reviewing Dontnod's brand new game, Vampyr. Specifically, I'm playing the game for Xbox One, as you guys can see right here. Now, I'm going to be honest right off the bat before we dive really deep into Vampyr. This isn't the best game I've ever played. It is kind of mediocre at times, but there's some really interesting concepts and ideas flowing through this game, no pun intended. So, without further ado here's a review of Vampyr.
In 2013, developer Dontnod Entertainment released a little hidden gem of a title called Remember Me. An action-adventure game published by Capcom, Remember Me was a fantastic game that really showed the promise of what a smaller studio could cook up. However, due to it being a very end-of-the-generation game for the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, the title was massively overlooked. Since then, developer Dontnod has made a much larger name for themselves with their highly successful adventure series Life is Strange. And while Dontnod has seen some pretty big success, they still remain a smaller and independent studio. Now, I've enjoyed both of these titles and was highly looking forward to their most ambitious project yet, Vampyr. You see, Vampyr is a very different kind of game than what we're used to these days. If Vampyr was released a decade ago, it would fall under the category of a B-grade game. This isn't a AAA experience, and there are times when you can really tell that. However, what ultimately makes Vampyr a unique experience are the systems that surround the world that the player-controlled character inhabits. The story of Vampyr is pretty straightforward. You play as Jonathan Reed, a doctor in the 1800s during the Spanish flu era, whom has recently been turned into a vampire. The game's story focuses on not only you and accepting your newfound powers and abilities, as well as life as a vampire, but the game also gives you some pretty big dynamic choices as a creature of the night. Will you use your powers for good or for evil? Will you conquer and divide, or will you simply use your medical knowledge and skills to help save London? Vampyr is a game that's all about choice. It's a very ambitious project for the studio of its size. And while a lot of the systems really do work and are very impressive, the game is littered with both technical issues as well as a combat system that is downright dreadful at times. The game also features a very poorly implemented difficulty scaling system that hindered me from actually completing the game. Now, I'm not a stranger to a challenging game, but when it becomes so incredibly frustrating that you whip the case across your room and break the actual game case, you know it's time to put down a game for a while. Now, I don't usually like to start with the negative aspects of a game in my reviews. However, because the combat is such a fundamental element of Vampyr, I feel it's best to get the worst part of this game out of the way. The combat in the game is a chore. It's boring and it comes off as incredibly sloppy. Combat in this game feels as if the developers wanted to mix the mechanics of both Dark Souls and the Batman Arkham games, as it feels like that's what the combat is going for. However, nothing becomes more evident on how bad the combat is than when you face a group of poison attack enemies, which only led one solution to their defeat. Mash the ever-loving shit out of the X or square button if on a DualShock 4 until the enemy is defeated. Doing a counter on this type of enemy is literally not possible, as they will block your counter, and many times that will result in the beginning of your character becoming poisoned. It's frustrating and maddening. And the only answer I could find in this issue online was what I've already told you. Just rush in and mash X. That's lazy game design. And sure, you can level up the good Dr. Reed and his attacks and powers, but even then, every time you level up, most of the enemies will level up with you, never really offering a fair advantage over them. In fact, because of this, there were many times when I found myself avoiding combat completely due to how much I grew to despise the combat mechanics in this game. I mean, at this point, it really hindered me from finishing this game, which was incredibly disappointing. And I will also tell you guys that at the very end of the game, I even respec'd my character's powers 3 separate times to try and defeat the final boss. However, because my character was of such a high level at this point, and because of the game's difficulty scaling, that only will result in a harder difficulty boss at the end of the game. So my only choice would be to play through this entire game again, kill less people on my way, ultimately changing the story of my game, but making the final boss easier. While this is a cool idea in theory, it's not very good in practice. However, putting aside the combat, you have something truly spectacular in this game, and it's a real shame that something this cool is structured into such a poor game. One of the most interesting aspects of the story in this game is the idea behind the 4 districts of London that this game takes place in. See, Vampyr presents a tantalizing mechanic not often seen in video games, the true consequences of your action fully realized. Each district will have a certain set amount of NPCs that you can interact with. In this case, you can choose to be a good doctor or a big bad undead fiend. But that's not all. You can also do different side quests for each of these NPCs, which will raise how much more experience points you receive if you choose to drain them of their life for your gain. But just how evil does being a vampire allow you to take things? How about killing your own damn butler? Is that evil enough for you? While visiting back with my mother later in the game, I came across our family's butler. Being the fact that your character is a doctor, you should pick up on the fact that your family comes from wealth. In order for myself to progress in the game and level up, I decided to take one entire district down just to see how far this mechanic will go. After draining several NPCs of their blood, the district was overtaken by turning the remaining NPCs into lesser vampires called skulls. The district was now unsavable and in complete ruin. You'll see areas now blocked off in rubble and ruin, complete with buildings on fire. And how about what you get to choose to embrace an NPC for your game? Well, the game will never ever let you off the hook without digging the knife in personally, unless you're a soulless husk of a human being with no conscience. After murdering my butler for my own personal gain, sleeping for the evening, this is how you level up your character, I awoke the next morning to find that everyone in the district was either infected or was a vampire. I had to kill my own mother who had turned into a vampire. This whole mechanic is really quite awesome and incredibly well thought out, and adds a huge layer of dynamic to this game that isn't normally seen in video games with choice. However, as cool as this system is within the game, it hinders the game from true greatness and actually breaks the game when you reach its conclusion. You see, as I previously stated, the final boss of the game has a difficulty that scales to whatever your level is. For example, at the time of myself being at the end of the game, my character was a level 33, but the boss scaled to level 40. Because of this, I simply could not defeat the final boss of the game. After failing to this boss a dozen times or so, I had to put the controller down and move on. In my teens and in my 20s, this is something that would have really bothered me, but as I've grown older and somewhat wiser, I suppose, I've learned that sometimes it just isn't worth the aggravation. I shouldn't be punished for wanting to play through the game as an evil vampire, but that's what Vampyr does if I choose to go that route. Mix that in with the fact that any potions or power-ups you use during this battle remain unused, even if you die and reload your save. That's just broken game design. The skill tree of the game is also interesting, however I feel that none of the skills actually felt too great, especially when mixed into the game's already boring and uninspired combat systems. With Vampyr being a B-level game, it's not too much of an oddity to expect a little bit of technical issues with a game like this. For full disclosure purposes here, I played through this game on the Xbox One X. The game feels as if it runs a lot worse on a base Xbox One or a PS4 system. The game offers what appears to be a higher resolution, but the frame rate doesn't feel locked. There are times in which the frame rate of the game is just downright awful. It's a shame, but it's something I feel could be fixed with a patch. A system like the Xbox One X is more than capable of handling this game and locking the frame rate at least 30 frames per second. And it's a shame that the game doesn't offer any different performance options for Microsoft's premium console. But being that the game is a lower budget game, I suppose that's to be expected. All in all, Vampyr was one of my most anticipated games of the year. I've been looking forward to Dontnod's follow-up to Remember Me, and in a lot of ways, it delivered one of the most unique video game experiences I've had in 2018. However, it's just a damn shame that the combat is such a letdown, and the broken difficulty scaling really ruins the overall experience. Because of this, I feel between that and some of the technical issues of the game, it holds back what easily could have stood out as one of the best games I've played this year. Instead, Vampyr comes off as a game that's a mixed bag that I simply cannot recommend, and it truly pains me to say this. Vampyr is a unique game that offers something truly interesting, but sacrifices the goodwill of its story and decision-making mechanics for lousy combat mechanics that hinder an otherwise excellent video game. I have to give Vampyr a D. It's really hard for me to recommend a game that penalizes the player for choosing to play as a villain, and that's what Vampyr does. Now, developer Dontnod understands difficulty is a huge issue in the game, and they are planning a patch to add a difficulty mode to the game. And while maybe that will help this game in the future, I have to review the product that I played and how it was at the time of my playing it. Simply put, I can't in good faith recommend you to play Vampyr, and that's truly a damn shame. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for checking out this review. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And as always, until next time.